Arseneault, and today I'm going to give you a tour of my quilting studio in Santa Fe, New Mexico. A little while ago there were some still photos on the quilt show of the studio, but I hadn't really moved in yet. It was brand new. Now I've been in it and working for a year, and we thought that you might like to see it as a working studio. I had the luxury of building this building from scratch, so it's got nice 10-foot ceilings and the opportunity for me to hang a lot of my quilts. Never had that before. So over here behind my Innova machine is a quilt I made for my dad for his 85th birthday. My dad was a great storyteller, and I didn't want those stories to be lost. He's gone now, and so I have this reminder of him and his stories looking over my shoulder all the time while I'm working. Then behind me is a quilt made from a Karen K. Stone pattern called Indian Orange Peel. It's a paper pieced pattern, still available today. It took me about 10 years to screw up the courage to make this quilt. And then the only change I made was that there's an additional row of blocks around the outer edge to create a wider border and rounded corners. I've got plenty of space here, so I like to arrange my studio with different workstations. Sometimes I'm working on more than one project at a time. My big splurge was this Architect's Light Box, which I use for marking quilts for quilting. And then this is my cutting surface. I found a couple of tables at a resale consignment store, stripped off the top to those tables, and used the bases with a new, larger top as my cutting table. There's great storage underneath, and we put casters underneath it too, so that when I need to block a quilt, I can slide this table away from the wall and walk all the way around the edges as I block. The quilt above here is one of my Dia de los Muertos quilts. This one is called Flower Power de los Muertos. There's something about the whimsy and joy of this kind of imagery that makes me happy.
And tell us about the rack to the left of the quilt. It looks like it's got rulers in it.
It does. These are the, may I move? These are the long arm rulers, all different kinds. It's a great rack. I wish I could remember the name of the people who made it, but it's a husband and wife operation. So yes, it's a great place to have all of the long arm rulers easily accessible. And then I thought that pegboard was a must to have in the studio as well. It's nice to have all your tools handy and out in the open so you can grab them when you need them.
And tell us about your setup style for the studio.
Setup style.
You said you like to have everything clean and handy, but you want it organized.
Right. Well, this is Santa Fe, and the style of real estate and homes here is very rustic. The outside of this building matches my home. It looks like it's from Santa Fe, stucco, portal, that kind of thing. Inside, I asked for an operating room space. I like to keep things clean, and I do like to keep things organized as well. So on the other side of the Innova, I have my design wall. That's one of the reasons I wanted such high ceilings in this room. I make big quilts, and I like to be able to see them all on the design wall as I'm working on them. It really helps to see your work on a vertical surface. I have a couple of projects in the works right now that are up here on the wall. It's just insulation board covered with a layer of batting and then flannel. So fabric will stick to it for a little bit of time, but I usually pin everything that goes up here because I tend to mull, so I would just watch it for a while on the wall. So two projects underway. One is a new Dia de los Muertos quilt. The other is traditional applique. I don't know what kind of quilter I want to be when I grow up. I like it all.
And so you bounce from one quilt to another. You work on one and then you get a little stumped or you get tired and then move to another one just to give yourself a break.
Actually, that's what happens. I get stumped. I have a problem. I need to think about it for a while. So I'll switch to another one. And then people keep getting married and having babies.
Oh, well, that happens, yes.
So there are those projects too.
So now tell us about this other area that's here that's sort of floating in the studio.
Right here?
Yes.
This is another station. I use this Brother machine primarily for paper piecing and binding application. I think the table is super sexy. I saw it at a quilt show in Salt Lake City and it sort of had me at hello. And I have enough space to float it here in the middle of the room. So this is where I'll do most of the piecing here at this machine or bindings, and then I'll scoot a chair over here on this little extension, and this is where I'll hand turn applique.
And what is it you liked about the table?
It makes me feel like Captain Kirk, like the commander of Starship Quilt World.
Because it looks like you sit within the table.
You do.
You can spin around to do a number of different things within one area without having to get up.
And also, if I were doing any quilting, perhaps on a small quilt, and I didn't want to put it on the Innova, it's got all of this side built in and the back drop leaf so that it will support the weight of a quilt if I'm doing that at this location. And then here behind it has some drawers and some storage. For thread. Yes.
And we mentioned the brand because I don't know if do you know the brand right now?
Fashion Sewing Cabinets of America.
Okay, and then behind that, you've got more storage cabinets with other supplies.
I love IKEA, and also some of these cabinets came from Amazon. All of them are assemble it yourself, so you know that's a spoiler alert. But they're great. I like to keep organized. These are Martha Stewart thread wraps. Once again, everything's out, everything's handy, so I don't have to struggle to find things.
And then you've got this other storage area on the other side of the door. What is this?
On this wall, we put in a half bath with a sink in case I need to soak the markings out of anything or that kind of thing. We put a closet in the middle. I store most of my quilts in here. I want to keep them out of the daylight.
Mm-hmm.
And there's fabric stored in here too.
Okay.
Really? Yes, of course there is.
Of course there is.
I wanted a little office-y kind of space, and that's what this space was meant to do. It wound up being the repository of my die cutter. Okay, we're back. Phone call handled. So this part of the room was intended to be an office space, and I guess I could still use it that way, but as it turns out, I use it mostly for the great big die cutter, cutting shapes for applique. I wanted you to take a look at the quilt above the office. I did not make this quilt. This was made by my friend Lois Podolny to celebrate our friendship, and she gave it to me as an amazing gift. So Lois is also looking over my shoulder as I work every day.
And this quilt was also in your show. So if
Yes.
people want to see more images of this quilt or more closely, they can look in the show.
And they can see its maker too.
Yes. And then the die cuts, I'm assuming, are over your right shoulder.
Yeah, I have storage racks from AccuCut that hold the dies for my studio cutter, and then a cabinet below where I store some of the plastics and some more dies.
And then you told us something that we were not aware of, is if you have a design that you particularly like and you're going to want to recreate it over and over again, they can custom make that die cutter for you.
They can. You can send them a sketch, and they have a custom department, so you'll be in contact with them from email, by email, and then you send them the drawing, then they'll give you a bid, and if it's copacetic for you, then they'll make the die to your specifications.
Okay, that's great to know.
Yeah.
It's great to know. So then over here you've got another sewing machine, and what do you do in this area?
I do. This is my trusty Bernina 1530. They stopped making it in '97, but I'm in love with this machine. I'm one with this machine. And I do primarily the applique on this machine. Working on a quilt right now and just stitching down the prepared edge applique. And so that happens here, another little cabinet by the same company. I really like the curves that they put in their product. Up top, this is a quilt I made called Almost Whole Cloth, Almost Amish. It was Amish quilting that made me interested in the whole field of quilting in the first place. I try to learn something new with every quilt that I make, and so this was an experiment. We literally printed the quilting lines on the fabric. with the help of a friendly blueprint printing company. Ironed freezer paper to the back of the fabric, made my design, and it rolled right through and printed the design on the fabric. So all I had to do was stitch on the lines. I also did double piping on this binding, which was challenging, but I think it looks nice with the solid colors.
That's great. And then next to this, you've got your industrial iron.
I got another tower of storage.
Oh, another tower of storage.
This is a reliable iron that's great because you only have to fill the water tank every once in a while.
Right.
And then I'm using some alpha storage units as the base for my big ironing surface, which is self-made.
Very nice. And what kind of fabrics are you normally purchasing for your works?
I'm sort of an equal opportunity fabric buyer, although I can tell you now, Lilo, that I'm making quilts differently now than I used to. I used to make 25 quilts a year and they were all pretty good. But my friend said, you know what it's like to make a quilt and then send it out into the world and it has its own life. You've given it your best. And I thought, I don't know if I've ever given a quilt my best. So I've slowed down. I take more time with every quilt now. I try to be precise and technically as strong as I can. And so I don't make as many quilts, maybe 1 or 2 a year, and that means I can't buy as much fabric.
Yeah.
I like all kinds though. Hand dyes, and I dye some of my own. I like polka dots and prints and that kind of thing. I guess the only thing I don't really buy is the reproduction fabrics, the 30s or the Civil War repo fabrics.
Well, thank you so much for taking us on a tour of your studio. It's great to see it a year after its completion and see what you've got going on.
Well, thanks for coming.
Thank you. We had one other thing we wanted to ask you before you left, or we left. What are you doing when you're not in the studio? Are you doing some fun new things?
I am. I'm kind of a one-trick pony. It's really all about quilting for me. If I'm not doing it, I'm thinking about it, or I'm attending quilt shows. What I discovered recently was that I had a couple invitations to do trunk shows at guilds, which I accepted, and I had a great time doing that. Also, I was invited to judge a couple of quilt shows, and I found that a wonderful opportunity for teaching. And so those are my hobbies now, I guess.
So what's the quilt you have on the table now that you want to show us?
This is one I would have brought to a trunk show. This is called Big Island and Thurium. It was my first original quilt. I was a hand quilter, a traditional quilter for 25 years before I started with original designs and with machine quilting. So this is a product of a Jane Sassaman class. I can share my tip. I got the center of the quilt done in the 5-day class, and I knew it was going to get a border, so before I left Asilomar, I asked Jane, what kind of border do you think I should do? And Jane said, something that I still use today, that if the middle of the quilt is busy, it requires an orderly border. And if the center is orderly, then you might want to get a little bit more active with the borders.
Oh, that's a great tip.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
my pleasure.